podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn and welcome to How We're the podcast as we come to the end of the international break that has been full of treats for your ears, such as interviews with the kitman Steve Aziz, former Sunderland manager Martin Crosby, of course. We had football finance guru Kieran Maguire, as well as club historian Rob Mason as well. And today we have yet another interview before the action gets underway, and we begin obviously to focus on Millwall at the weekend. Today we have a journalist who probably knows more about North East football and how it all works up here than anyone on the planet. And I'm not going to rattle off all the publications he's written for over the years because it would probably be easy to list the ones he hasn't. To me, I remember his name in the papers writing about North East football as I was growing up, along with names like Brian McNally, Jeff Story, Doug Weatherall. It is, of course, Ian Murtagh. Welcome, Ian.
Well, it's nice to talk, and I'm not quite as old as them. Sadly, we lost Brian last year. Yeah. Doug's still going strong at, I think he's 92, 93. And again, we lost Jeff Story a couple of years ago.
Yeah. We'll get into that because those names will pop up again, I'm sure. But how are you keeping? And just kind of in these couple of weeks, I mean, how do you find the international breaks as a journalist as well?
It's quite strange because there was a period when I was covering Ireland matches, and my family's Irish. I loved that. And then I had 2.5 years covering England, which was pretty hectic. That coincided with the 2018 World Cup. Since then, since I got freelance, set up on my own, the international break is boring. In fact, it's almost as boring as watching the internationals.
Well, I can't stand them. I'm just wondering, while we're on the subject, you mentioned Ireland and England there. I mean, yeah. It might have been a bit early on, but there was obviously in the 90s, there was that one at Lansdowne Road.
Yeah, so that's right. I mean, that was very, very sad, wasn't it?
Yeah,
I think that was the day Newcastle, Warren Barton, I think was at Newcastle Wimbledon at the time. He made his debut in that game, and of course, it didn't count. But I mean, Jack Charlton, I remember speaking to him about it, and he had tears in his eyes almost speaking about that day. It was so shameful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm in the age where kind of I picture kind of your name on the kind of articles back in the 90s in the Chronicle and the Journal, and on a weekly basis, actually, I seem to quote your writing as we delve into the newspaper archives, because we do an On This Day piece every day for the site. And the amount of times I've pulled your words out and, said, this is what you said in those.
Yeah. But newspapers, what are newspapers?
Well, exactly. But I was going to say, maybe for kind of younger listeners, is it worth mentioning the long list of kind of publications you've written for?
Well, I got into sport very early. I tell people I was only a proper journalist for about a year after university. I joined the Hexham Courant, which was far removed from the glamour, razzmatazz of football. I loved it, but I was desperate to get into sport. It was my ambition, and I had 6 months at the Shields Gazette, and then a job came up at the Northern Echo. And they weren't very happy when I handed in my notice so soon, but I loved it at the Northern Echo. I was a jack of all trades, master of none. Some say I still am. But I would fill in for the established journalists who were covering Newcastle, Sunderland, Middlesbrough. And I'd also cover Darlington, Hartlepool, York City and Scarborough. Scarborough's manager at the time was Neil Warnock. There was Bob Moncur was at Hartlepool, Brian Little at Darlington, and I think it was Bobby Saxton at York City. So, you're always in a hurry for the big time, but in one sense. But my goodness, looking back, the valuable experiences doing them, and whenever I can always remember when I filled in for a guy called Ray Robertson covering Middlesbrough, and I was scared of Bruce Rioch, and to this day, Colin Todd still reminds me of that. He was a nutcase if he wrote a story that he didn't like.
Yeah. Well, Ian Wright seems to mention him every week on the overlap. Bruce Rioch, I think.
Yeah.
He suffered under him, didn't he, as well?
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, I mean, I saw you kind of talking on a Newcastle podcast a good while back, and you were saying, well over 30 years of writing about all the Northeast clubs almost has made you a fan of all of them in a way where you'd like them to do well. But, do you think, over the years, getting to know all those characters at the top clubs and beyond as well, you mentioned York, but you considering how much failure the region's seen on the pitch, it must be a natural thing to kind of fall in love with all of them.
It is, absolutely. I mean, I was brought up in a household where my mother was a Sunderland fan. She was brought up in Crook. Celtic was a family team. I lived in Newcastle. I would argue at the time there was probably more preference to Newcastle, although myself and my friend used to love going to Roker Park, not just for the football, but for the programme shop, which was behind the Roker end.
Yeah.
And I used to love going down there.
Yeah, I used to go on that to buy bundles of old programmes from.
Absolutely, yeah.
I used to buy all sorts from there. But yeah, I mean, because I mentioned kind of some names in the introduction, big names, like yourself and Jeff Story, Brian McNally, Doug Weatherall. And Bill Bradshaw as well, who was already in Fleet Street at that point, by the end of the 80s. Some big names in Northeast football writing. And I don't know whether it says more about me, but I'm not really sure those big names exist in that way anymore.
Well, certainly from a newspaper point of view, no, because, print, if it's not dead yet, but it's a far less influential form of media. There'll be colleagues of mine, younger colleagues, who will have massive social media followings. Craig Hope, for example, George Colkin. So to the younger generations, they'll be the names that crop up. But funny, you mentioned Bill Bradshaw. Bill gave me a real helping hand in my career. When I was covering Sunderland for the Chronicle, I would also do the Sunday People match reports, which was very handy money with a young family. And also, when he became editor of the Journal, on the day he left the Journal, his last decision was to appoint me. And I moved from the Chronicle to the Journal in 1995.
Yeah. And we'll come on to it, but, Bill Bradshaw, ended up breaking that huge story, which we'll come on to. But you mentioned the Hexham Current, the Shields Gazette, Northern Echo. Got the job at the Chronicle around 1990, and you've mentioned already the Bruce Riochs, and there was Jim Smith at Newcastle, Denis Smith at Sunderland. I mean, for a young journalist at the time, those are huge characters to have to deal with.
Absolutely. Must tell you this, I left the Northern Echo 2 days before my wedding, and I joined the Evening Chronicle 2 days after my honeymoon. So there we are. So you can work out, I've just celebrated our 34th wedding anniversary. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there were huge characters both in journalism and in football itself. And while this region hasn't had many honours, I was going to say no honours, but of course we have had the Newcastle one a few days ago. You always felt it was a big region. It was a region that mattered, and nationally, despite the lack of success, this region meant more than, say, other regions where there was, for instance, Yorkshire, big teams like Leeds, the two Sheffield clubs, but this region always felt more important. And I think that was also the case with sports editors in London.
Yeah. Because actually, I think Bill Bradshaw, we've spoken to him in the past, and I think his boss at the time at the Sunday People was a Sunderland fan as well.
There were an awful lot of Sunderland fans. When I first joined the Northeast Pack, I would say that Sunderland fans were the dominant force, much less so now.
Yeah. I mean, and again, in terms of Denis Smith, when you started off, I think he wrote a big section in his book that he was shocked when he when he moved from York City to Sunderland in terms of the spotlight. I think he said it went from one press conference a week to morning, afternoon, every single day or something.
Well, it's funny you should say that. Denis, who I still see him sometimes when Stoke are at Middlesbrough or or Sunderland. And Dennis, and I always have a good chat with him. I always got on very well with him. And he came over, he said, yeah, come and tell these lads, meaning the local Potteries media. He said, didn't I do 2 press conferences every single day of the week? I said, you certainly did. You did one for the evening papers at 9:30, and you did one at lunchtime for the daily papers. And I must tell you a story at Roker Park back then. And of course, it was before Sky Sports News. It was before laptops, mainly. I think there were 1 or 2 laptops around. And of course, you used to dictate your copy to a copy taker. Well, believe it or not, the payphone at Roker Park was literally 5 yards away from the manager's office. So I could be writing dictating my piece down the phone, writing something like "Under Fire, Denis Smith" as he's walking past me. There were quite a few uncomfortable moments then, and I must say this in case I forget later on. When Denis lost his job, which was December 1991,
yeah.
And of course there was no Sky Sports News to flash it, etc. We all got phone calls from his secretary, Moira, and she said, "I'd just like to tell you that Denis has had his contract terminated, and he'd like to invite the North East media to his house this afternoon for sherry and mince pies." So this was, I think, December the 29th, I think it might have been. And there we went all the way up to his house, and there was his wife pouring cups of tea, handing out glasses of sherry, and asking us if we wanted Christmas cake or mince pies. You don't get things like that these days.
No, I mean, yeah, I was just, in terms of these days, I was just thinking when you mentioned the phone there, because
Yeah.
I was looking at, looking back through some of the pieces we've had on, and we did an obituary for Jeff Story when he sadly passed away a few years ago. One of the pictures in that piece that we did was of Jeff calling in his match report at Roker Park, and I think it's you sitting next to him in the background.
Yeah. I think Jeff Brown gave me that picture. I think you can see is Jeff Story's wearing his old hat, and I think Jeff showed me that picture.
Yeah, but I mean, it's something when you think of today, when you've got a journalist there with a phone in his hand calling the report in.
That's right. Times have changed so much. I had the Pink to do when I was on the Chronicle, and he had the Footy Echo, and we would ring freelancers to hire telephones up and down the country, and the copy takers would ring us at 20 to 3. We'd send the teams out, and we'd be on again from 3 o'clock to 3:45, then back again at 4. It was just different times.
Yeah. Because I remember racing to the shop around 6 o'clock to pick up my Sports Echo.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
I always found it a better production than the Pink. Even though I was working for the Pink, Sunderland fans at the time were prolific letter writers, and I'd buy that as well as my own publication to read the letters. And Sunderland fans, there was a stream of great letters in the Football Echo back then.
Yeah. Am I just sounding old when I say that's a sad
Not so to speak.
that I think that's a sad thing that those things disappeared, and like little routines, like you'd see people queuing up waiting around at newsagents, right, because I used to live near Roker Park, and all of the newsagents were always full of people around 6 o'clock waiting for the Sports Echo delivery.
That's right, and the Pinks and the Sports Echoes, they had a boost to sales in the early 90s when the National Lottery was started. So of course people would go and get the lottery ticket, and it was almost the last era was a golden era. Have you ever heard the story about Michael Gray and the first ever National Lottery?
No, don't think I've heard that one.
I think he told me right here. He got the first 5 numbers. And then the 6th one didn't make him a millionaire. But yeah, I think the very, very first lottery, he got the first 5 numbers.
Right. I wonder if you ever would have I wonder if you would have jacked it in. Just not bothered.
You would. Not Michael, knowing him.
Well, I mean, we got on to Denis Smith, actually. You talked about when he was sacked,
Yeah.
but I mean, do you think he got a bad deal in the end with Sunderland? Because you think about where he brought the club from, and he virtually spent no money until the Marco Gabbiadini money.
Look, yes, they went up due to Swindon's misdemeanors, but I see quite a comparison between today's Sunderland and the Sunderland that went up there, because they hadn't been in the second tier for long. There were an awful lot of good young players, and I must tell you this: a few years ago, when my mother died, I was clearing out the wardrobes, and I used to religiously get the Mag and the Love Supreme, and any fanzine that came about, I used to devour them. And I saw this mag. It was the summer special from the summer of 1990. Sunderland had just beaten Newcastle, of course, in the playoffs. And the editorial was saying, well, let's face it, we're in for a long period of darkness. There's Sunderland with all these vibrant young kids, several of them who are being tipped to play for England. And he was talking about the Marcos, the Gary Bennett, Gary Harris, Gordon Armstrong. And he said, and we are stuck with veterans like Mickey Quinn, Mark McGee, Roy Aitken, Billy Askew. And, do you know, at the time, I just got the Chronicle job. As I said, the first game I covered for the Chronicle was the famous Kieran Brady game against West Ham 4-3, which is, you know, commonly recognised as one of the best games of Roker Park of that era. And so they went into the Premier League, and Denis, as ever, money was tight, but he bought Kevin Ball and he bought Peter Davenport. Now, I got off to a bad start with Ball, who I loved a bit. Now we get on well, but his debut, I think, was in a friendly against Dynamo Kiev at Roker Park, and he didn't play particularly well. Anyway, a few days later, Denis picked his team for the trip to Norwich, and his centre-half pairing was John McPhail and Gary Bennett. You wondered, was there a little bit of sentimentality there? John McPhail had been a faithful servant of his at York and at Sunderland, but he was at the veteran stage, and that was his one and only Premier League appearance.
Yeah.
Bowley, of course, got back in the team straight away and I think he was player of the season that season. That season did end up in relegation. I'll tell you what, that first half of that season, Sunderland played some unbelievable football. At Norwich, they lost 3-2, but Marco scored a worldie.
Yeah, edge of the box.
They drew 0-0 with Tottenham a few days later at Roker Park. Yeah. Gazza's return to the northeast. There was huge hype about that game. And then, which I understand was your first ever game, was a game against Manchester United. Gary Bennett scored a winner. And I remember George Best was at that game covering for Capital Radio. And he was raving about Marco Gabbiadini. And I think he did a piece in the national paper saying Bobby Robson should come and have a look at him. And he was on fire at that time. Peter Davenport looked a very, very good signing as well. And something in that first half of the season, they had some terrific performances. I remember one at Tottenham, Christmas time, 3-3. I think Colin Pascoe scored 2. It's one of the best games I've ever seen. Yeah. But, you know, and then just after Christmas, Sunderland beat Arsenal 1-0. And I think they were 9th in the table. You just didn't envisage relegation, but, you know, they kept losing as the winter months came. Davenport was struggling on the heavy pitches. They brought Brian Mooney from Preston, who his manager, remember John McGrath saying he's the new George Best, but he never really did it. And of course, they went down after a performance. I think 15,000 Sunderland fans were at Main Road to see bravely lose their top flight status with a 3-2 defeat. When everyone was cursing the name Niall Quinn that day.
Yeah. I remember Paul Walsh in that 3-3 game was the star for Spurs, you know. But yeah, that I remember the crowds around that Spurs game because it was just after that World Cup and Lineker and Gascoigne.
That's right.
And they were huge then. But actually, looking at the stats for that season, when I've looked into it, I think Sunderland had some sort of record for losing Leeds that season. I think they took the lead in so many games that year.
Losing leads and missing penalties.
Yeah.
I can remember around the Christmas time. Was it that Christmas time? They missed penalty at Queen's Park Rangers. Narrowly lost. I think they might have missed a penalty at Crystal Palace as well. But yeah, they kept missing penalties that season.
Yeah. So
this one.
Yeah. Just in terms of how you cover them, because when we talked to Denis Smith, and he mentioned, being in a hotel on an away trip for a game, and he got a phone call about, you mentioned Kieran Brady, he got a phone call that on a payphone in the hotel that the club had confirmed that Kieran Brady had actually signed, and he came back and he said, "Oh, we're having a drink with the press lads," and he said he was telling them all about this young Irishman he'd signed. I mean, was that the kind of the relationship you had?
A lot of younger supporters, they won't believe this. There were times when we would travel on the team bus. I can remember going down to Brighton on the team bus and going to Swindon on the team. But now I was at the Northern Echo there. I was just filling in for Frank Johnson, who was on holiday. But yeah, there were a few times you'd go on the team bus and then you'd get ready for dinner, and I can always remember a game before West Brom at the West Brom Moat House, and Denis having a furious political argument with Brian McNally. Denis was a proud Tory. Brian McNally was a proud left-wing firebrand. And but Denis loved things like that. Denis loved confrontation, and with a few glasses of wine, and it would all be smoothed over in the morning.
Yeah. But when was it a strange one when you had that close relationship, because whenever you wrote anything or you felt like you had to write something that wasn't necessarily positive, you'd obviously have a conversation to have.
Difficult. In fact, I can remember, I don't know if Bordy remembers this, but it was the game which was to prove Malcolm Crosby's last, the Pools panel defeated Tranmere.
Yeah. You mentioned that.
And we went with it. Yeah, it was great listening to Malcolm. Look, I'm going to get in touch with him again very, very soon, because top man. But anyway, we got the press were on the bus to Tranmere. Don't know why, because by that stage we wouldn't go very often. And I got on, and of course the press were at the front. And Bordy shouted, "Hey lads, here's Murtagh. He's tipped us to lose at Tranmere tomorrow." This is on the Friday lunchtime. And I must have had this burst of inspiration. I said, "That's right, Kevin. I hope I'm wrong. Just like I was last week when I tipped you to win." And all the lads went, "Hey, he's done you there, Bordy." And anyway, the Pools panel gave them a defeat. So there you are. I was right.
Yeah, and that was the end of Malcolm Crosby. But actually, during Malcolm Crosby's reign, because the conversation we had with him, he was talking a lot about having to deal with the press in terms of the rumours constantly about who was supposed to take over the job. And he mentioned it. He told us the story about Neil Warnock being that person and apparently turning it down or not wanting to until Malcolm Crosby had left, because he was supposed to go with Denis Smith. I mean, can you remember covering all of that?
Very much so, because I broke the story of Neil Warnock. And I can remember on the day I wrote Warnock was going to get the job, one or two other people saying Don Mackay, who was the former Blackburn manager. Yeah. And Neil, it's basically as Malcolm said, this snowball, which was a little snowball to start off with, kept rolling down the hill with the cup run. And Neil Warnock, who is nobody's fool, thought, well, I'm on a hiding to nothing if I replace the popular Malcolm Crosby. But, the league form wasn't great, and it was pretty obvious that Bob Murray didn't see him as a long-term answer to the Sunderland manager's job.
Yeah, I think he only gave him a 1-year contract, which
he did.
Tells you a lot.
That's right, and it was just a few days before the cup final as well.
Yeah, and that's it. I was going to say, but in terms of that cup final, I imagine with the state of Sunderland, Middlesbrough, and Newcastle at the time, it was a nice surprise for local journalists to get they went to Stamford Bridge that year, and Hillsborough for the semi-final, and Wembley for the final. And
believe it or not, the North East media stayed in the same hotel as the Sunderland team. The Complete Angler on the River Thames houses nearby Rod Stewart's house, Ernie Wise's house, a brilliant location. And I think we got down on the Wednesday. One or two of the older guys travelled to London for the Football Writers' annual dinner. I think myself and Carl Little played tennis against John Byrne and Peter Davenport. And one journalist who shall not be named, who's no longer with us, but he got reprimanded for taking his fishing rod in the Thames, telling he wasn't allowed. It was... It's just something you couldn't fathom these days, you know? And I do remember coming downstairs on the day of the cup final on the Saturday morning, and the mood had changed, not so much as from good mood to bad mood, but from enjoyment, but this is business. I remember seeing Tony Norman, and I can't remember who else, sitting at the breakfast table, and they didn't give us dirty looks, but we thought, they do not want to be disturbed. They're in the zone now. And I can very much remember that.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to blame you for John Byrne missing that chance now, because he was playing tennis too much during the week.
Yeah, we took far too much out of them.
But actually, I mean, just after that cup final, a huge story in North East football. And I'm not going to compare it to Sol Campbell, but Paul Bracewell moving from Sunderland to Newcastle on a tribunal, what it was back in the day before the Bosmans. I mean, that must have been a big one to report on.
You say that's a huge story, but what had happened in February that year, and it was the night I was travelling down to Oxford. It was the fourth round replay, and we were staying down in that part of the country because Sunderland played Bristol Rovers on the Saturday. I was with Paul Nunn, the journal, who died in 1998. But the two of us were driving, and we just got past Carville services on the A1, and it came out that Kevin Keegan had become the Newcastle manager. Yeah. Now, Paul at the time covered both clubs, and he wanted to get back. I was driving. I said, well, no, we're on our way now. I didn't want to, I had to think of myself. And so what was happening at St. James's Park with Keegan's return, it very much overshadowed Sunderland's win. And I think that day, and some of your listeners might not agree with me, but I think that day, Keegan's second coming changed the whole landscape in the North East. I always thought up to then, Sunderland and Newcastle were equally big. Mm-hmm. But because he was this huge, not national figure, international figure, and at the time, there was a lot of investment on the Quayside, the Newcastle Gateshead initiative, and suddenly the crowds in Newcastle went from 18,000, 19,000 to 30-odd thousand. And in a way, it eclipsed Sunderland's achievement in reaching the cup final, especially the fact they lost the cup final. And I do think from that day forward, a lot of areas, and I'll quote Ashington. I remember doing a talk in Ashington just a year earlier, 91. I think it was Quinn and Gabbiadini. I used to fill in for John Gibson when he couldn't make it. And I remember introducing Mickey Quinn on stage, polite applause. Introducing Gabbiadini, massive applause. Ashington at the time, I think it goes back to the 1926 general strike, but Ashington was very much red and white. And a lot of the coal mining areas of Northumberland were. Now, I would imagine if you go into the schools of Ashington, Cramlington, Bedlington, Eyemouth, etc., you wouldn't find too many Sunderland fans now. They don't support the team of the grandfathers. Maybe the fathers brought up Newcastle. Yeah. And I do think that's changed. Sunderland are still a huge club. Don't get me wrong. Up to 1970, they'd amassed more top-flight points than everyone else in the country, include, I think, Liverpool and Arsenal overtook them that season. But I do think Keegan was very much a catalyst for a Newcastle renaissance, not just in terms of growing its fan base.
Yeah. But actually, and it was obviously the pull of Keegan, why, as soon as I think he approached Bracewell, he went up the road, yeah.
Of course, yeah, and scored a worldie on his debut, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. But was that was that an indictment of how Sunderland were run at the time? Because we've talked to John Ficklin, and he said the club he found, he was surprised because he was a fan before he got involved, and when he got involved, he said he found it was a bit almost like a social club the way it was run, and Bracewell was offered a 1-year contract when he would have signed a 2, and was it just that was a sign of how we were run at the time?
Well, I can remember there's a little bit of I got a little legal bother. It all got resolved, but it was Bob Murray's PR company who sent out a press release that John Ficklin was going to join the board. Now, I actually got on very well with John. I used to see him on trains coming back, and I liked him a lot. But he was quoted as saying, "My ultimate aim is to see Sunderland back in the top flight." And I remember doing a comment piece saying, "How the mighty have fallen, the ultimate aim, the ultimate meaning, all I want is for Sunderland to get promotion." And my argument was, these two North East giants, they shouldn't just want to be, one of the all-surrounds in the top flight. They should be competing for honours in the way that Everton and Liverpool were at the time. And John said, "Oh, I see your point. And I said, this press release has done you no favours, because what do you want to see for Sunderland?" He said, "I want to see them winning things." So yeah, at the time, was it a small club mentality? Well, I didn't see the books yet. I think, players have mentioned the fact that they would move to so perceived smaller clubs for more money. So I think that answers your question.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was a line in Denis Smith's book that said when John McPhail left that season, he went to Hartlepool, and he went to Hartlepool for more money.
Is that right? My goodness, I didn't know that one. I missed that one.
Yeah. But in terms of money, I've always thought that the money that Denis Smith didn't get, maybe in transfer funds, was given to Terry Butcher a few years later. And I do wonder if part of that was because of what was happening at Newcastle up the road, and he was almost forced to do it.
Yes, I mean, there was that great escape when Sunderland lost 3-1 at Notts County.
Yeah.
I think they had 2/3 of the crowd at Meadow Lane that day. And Terry Butcher gave an extraordinary press conference after the game when it was, I think, Cambridge had lost and Sunderland stayed up. And he said, "There will be players out there who will never kick another ball for Sunderland." And he proceeded to name them: Gordon Armstrong, Gary Hours, etc. So basically, they turned against Terry straight away. And then, of course, you had the 4 signings that summer: Phil Gray, good lad; Andy Melville, who became a good servant; Ian Rogerson, and Derek Ferguson, who weren't so great.
And there was Alec Chamberlain as well.
Alec Chamberlain as well, of course, that's right. And of course, the season got off to a bad start, 5-0 defeated at Derby.
Yeah.
And then I think Sunderland, they won a League Cup tie. A young lad on loan, Lee Power, from Norwich, who became a multi-millionaire later on in life. Yeah. I think he made quite an impact. But, Terry, I actually, believe it or not, politically, we were opposites. I was Celtic, he was Rangers, but I actually got on quite well with him. But he was a decent guy, but he wasn't managerial material. I remember him saying to Jeff Story and I, one morning press conference, because it was still the daily press conferences at the time. He asked, he said, "Do you think it's about time I dropped the players and just put all my 5 new signings in?" And we sort of looked at each other and said, "Well, we're not the manager. It's not up to us, Terry." Yes, he had bad luck with that car crash before the season, and so he couldn't play all the signings straight away. But it just didn't work for him. And I think it was Stan Collymore, wasn't it, who destroyed Sunderland in the Southend, which Southend would always come up here and beat Sunderland. Who would have thought it?
4-2, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And I think they might have had Brett Angel up front at the same time. I can't remember, but everyone we seem to speak to with Terry Butcher, I mean, you say you got along with him, but it seems to me that he tried to shake things up a bit too quickly, because everyone we speak to seems to say that he upset everyone.
Well, he wasn't canny, was he? He wasn't canny. You don't tell players you're not going to play for me again because you might need them. And then I remember when they played a derby at Newcastle, and he'd shaved his hair.
Yeah.
And the story goes, that he burst into the away dressing room at St. James's Park and said, "I'm a commando. You're all commandos.
Yeah.
We're going to breach this fort." Now, I can't remember if it certainly didn't get in the papers, but that was the rumour. And of course, he'd already lost some of the players who he was forced to bring back months after saying they would never kick a ball. It just wasn't right. Ironically, he had a fair career up in Scotland, didn't he? I think he did pretty well at Inverness.
Later
at
on.
one time. Yeah, I've kept in touch with him a little bit, and of course, when I was on England duty, I'd seen him a few times, and he didn't get on with Bob Murray, but he liked living in the area.
Yeah. I mean, again, just talking about that kind of social club element that John Fickler mentioned, because it was kind of Mick Buxton who came along next. And I think this was so we've got Malcolm Crosby. This was the third manager, because he was a reserve team coach. So it was the third manager would appointed from inside the club.
Now, can you imagine what it's like working for the Tyneside-based Evening Chronicle, covering a Mick Buxton press conference when Alan Oliver and John Gibson were covering Kevin Keegan press conferences? The chasm was absolutely huge. There was, at the time, yes, he got the side organised, and I can remember the one shining light for Sunderland was the three amigos were breaking into the team: Michael Gray, Martin Smith, Craig Russell, and they did well. There were great hopes for the three of them, but I didn't get on particularly well with Mick. I did find him quite a boring person, and I couldn't understand how someone born and raised in Sunderland seemed to find the job such a chore, and I can't think of another word for it. I can't imagine too many inspirational speeches inside the dressing room. Let's put it that way.
No. And it's again in Terry Butcher's book. He talks about that he believed that because he said Bob Murray knew Mick Buxton, and he said he brought him in as reserve team coach without Terry Butcher knowing, and he thought that Bob Murray almost lined that one up.
Well, quite possibly, but as Malcolm Crosby mentioned in an earlier podcast with you, Terry Butcher was probably lined up. Probably Bobby Ferguson brought him in. So what goes around comes around.
Yeah, that's it. And then we started then. Obviously, we brought in Peter Reid, and I remember the club were almost rock bottom then, because we had the dealings with the Football Association because Dominic Matteo wasn't registered correctly, and we'd spent 600,000 on Brett Angel, and then Mick Buxton was sacked. So we had Peter Reid come in. I mean, did you see that one coming? Because for so long we'd seemed to appoint from inside the club, and then suddenly he aimed high.
I think the go-between then was another good friend of mine, Paul Hetherington, who was a long-established journalist. He moved to the Northwest, but never hid his Sunderland allegiance or Sunderland passion. Of course, he was the elder brother of Clive Hetherington, who I worked with, and the son of Len Hetherington, who covered Sunderland for the Evening Chronicle for many, many years. So a great sporting dynasty, as it were. And so he was the link. Now, I can remember there was someone I had a contact at Sunderland, and I think it broke in the afternoon. And I said, "Who's the manager?" And I could tell there were other people in the room. And I remember saying, "You might be listening to this now, I don't know, but I'm not going to say who it is." But I said, "I'm going to go through the alphabet and stop and just cough at the letter of his surname." So, NOPQR. It's not Bobby Robson, is it? He said, "No, I don't think I can make that appointment." I said, "Well, look, I'm going to go to the first name now, and I'm going to do the same thing. NOPPR. Peter Reid." He said, "Yes, I think I can make that meeting," and that was it. And I managed to get that. Peter came in like a hurricane. Do you know what his first decision was? For years, and I think it came from at the old Roker Park, the manager's office, when Denis was there, he had the main desk, and to his side was the desk of Viv Busby, God rest his soul. And it was very similar when Mick Buxton was there. Trevor Hardy, very affable chap, he had the next desk. Denis took one look at the office and said, "Get that other table out. This is the manager's office." Got the manager in the space where the other desk was. He installed a fridge. Bit of class. And I can remember within a week, he'd taken Jeff Story and I out for a lovely meal. And he did the same with the Daily Journalists. And my goodness, he was like a breath of fresh air. And I can remember the game at Burnley when a lot of Sunderland fans there. I think did Sunderland get a draw which clinched safety.
Yeah.
And the show of fanaticism there was unbelievable. I'm not sure if Peter had planned to stay on, but if he hadn't, then that day certainly changed it, and he became certainly one of the most significant managers in Sunderland's history.
Yeah. Well, I think you mentioned the Man City game where under Denis Smith, and I think he said that was part of it as well, why he came.
Yeah, that's right. He did, didn't he? That's right.
But yeah, I mean, as you said, he took over. We were almost rock bottom, and I think that was March, April 1995.
It was.
We move a couple of years down the line, even 3 years down the line, 4 years down the line, new stadium, Premier League club finishing 7th in the league.
Yeah.
I mean, the change of the club in 3 or 4, I mean, I'm almost glad that I lived through that to see it, because the club just transformed within those 3 or 4 years.
It did. And I remember after the first derby at the stadium, right, when Sunderland had gone 2-0 down, Kevin Phillips got 2 goals. And afterwards, Bobby Robson and Kieran Dyer got in a bit of trouble for saying it's the loudest atmosphere they'd ever been in. Now, without express preferences, I think that because it's a bowl, then at its best, and we'd love to see it at its best in the playoffs this year, wouldn't we? The acoustics are quite sensational. But yeah, I mean, listen, Sunderland, you just expected the Phillips and Quinn, at least one of them, to score. You had, Michael Gray bombing down the wing, Chris Macon hard as nails. Bawley in midfield was shutting out other teams. It was a wonderful team, and of course Sorensen. People forget about him. Sunderland have had some good goalkeepers, and he carried on that proud tradition.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of tell my lad now, Sunderland the last few years, he's young and, known us in League One and stuff. But I say that I used to go to the game, and the conversation used to be, well, how many are we going to win by?
No,
was it going to be 2? Was it going to be 3? I mean, even in the Premier League,
absolutely. Absolutely.
It was incredible. And from your point of view, following them, you said early on he took you out for meals, but, I think during that time it was quite famous that Peter Reid would take people for an Italian, and sit in the restaurants with people and things like that. Was it because, you had characters like Bobby Saxton, obviously, at the club, and you had big personalities, Alex Rain, Al Quinn. I mean, it must have been fun to cover Sunderland as well in the late 90s with those around.
Believe it or not, in the promotion season, he banned me for about 4 or 5 months. To this day, I was stitched up by the sub-editor in the office with a headline, but and I won't say what the story was because it was quite delicate about a certain player. But I can remember going to Bury the night Sunderland won promotion, and Reedy called me over. I went a few away gigs. He went, "E." Scouts, as always, they'll shorten everyone's name, even if they're called Ian. He went, "E, over here." He said, "Right, you're back in next season." I said, "What about for next week?" He said, "Don't push your luck, son." And I was back in for the next season. So the games I covered for Sunderland, that promotion, tended to be away from home.
Yeah. I mean, again, during the 1990s, like as I mentioned, you're at the Chronicle and the Journal that whole time.
Yeah.
You could argue, I mentioned, the 3 clubs were in a bad way at the start of the decade. And we've gone through kind of what's happened in that time with Kevin Keegan at Newcastle, bring Brian Robson into it at Middlesbrough, and the move to the Riverside. Then Peter Reid moved to the Stadium of Light. I mean, for a Northeast sports writer at the Chronicle and Journal, what a decade you had
I
to
think
cover.
I felt as if I had a season ticket for Wembley Stadium. Never saw them win there, but I was down there all the time. You know, the 97, 98, 99 Cup finals, League Cup final, playoffs. It was a wonderful era. And I remember when we used to draw up the lists, your match lists at the Journal. The Journal, which I much preferred, you didn't have one person on a certain team. You'd mix and match, and there was no bad match. You know, if you were covering Newcastle at Southampton or Sunderland at home to West Ham, or you might want to go to Middlesbrough v Liverpool. You know, I mean, they were all big matches, big name players, and there was an element of success with all three teams.
Yeah. I mean, just specifically on those three managers and those huge personalities. I mean, looking back now 30 years later, I mean, how big was their impact on Northeast football? Because is there an argument to say if it wasn't for those three personalities that the three clubs wouldn't have kicked on like they did?
Are you talking Robson, Reid?
Robson, Keegan and Peter Reid.
Keegan, Reid. Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, what Brian Robson wasn't necessarily a coach, but he had a magnetism and players wanted to play for him. Very much was the case with Peter Reid as well. I mean, listen, it's a good quiz question. Who was the last football club to have a song in the top 40? And it was Sunderland with Cheer Up Peter Reid. And I can always remember a game at Barnsley. And you remember Charles Harrison of Radio Metro? Well, Charles Harrison was from Barnsley, and his brother was a director at Barnsley. And he persuaded his brother to instruct the local DJ to play the song before kickoff. Well, at least I think 2.5 sides of the ground were Sunderland fans, and this was played, and it was just a ferocious volume. I don't think the rest of the Barnsley hierarchy were too pleased about it, but yeah, I mean they were great times. You know, Peter Reid was if Kevin Keegan, Newcastle fans saw him as a messiah, then Sunderland fans saw Peter Reid as a saviour.
Yeah. I mean, just going through all of that and then listening to kind of your relationships. I mean, do you almost feel a little bit sorry for the younger journalists coming through that they're not able to have those relationships with the people in the game?
It's different. It's been such a gradual change. You know, I mean, put it this way: the young lads covering Newcastle now, you don't need to feel sorry for them. They're hopping off here, there, and everywhere, aren't they? You know, different with Sunderland. I do believe Phil Smith's the most outstanding local journalist around at the moment. He's excellent. But do I feel sorry for them? Listen, I mean, through the midst of time, you look back at the good times. You look back at the great relationships, and you forget the bollockings and the bands, et cetera. But yeah, it's true. I mean, if I saw some of those players from the 90s, whether it was Steve Watson, Lee Clark, Alan Thompson, Steve Howe, Newcastle, or Gary Hours, Kevin Ball, Gary Bennett at Sunderland, and there's one or two I haven't mentioned I'd love to see again. You know, yeah, it's lovely chatting to them, and you almost forget that you were on the other side of the fence to them. But yeah, someone like Gary Bennett, you know, it's always lovely to see him.
Yeah. And I mean, just in terms of types of journalism as well, because one thing we kind of touched on was Bill Bradshaw early on and breaking that Swindon Town story and getting into it with, you know, obviously Lou Macari was at West Ham at the time, and you know, when we talked to us, you know, he had some problems. You know, he would get phone calls during the night. But you know, that type of journalist. I mean, do you think now there's too much of a race for clicks and things that we've lost?
Certainly.
We've lost that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there were certain publications. I mean, I despair of the fact, and I'm going off on tandem a little bit here. I despair of the fact that Newcastle Falcons don't get coverage. Newcastle Diamonds Speedway went defunct because the Chronicle stopped covering them. Durham Cricket doesn't get as much coverage as it used to. Yeah, I mean, at the moment, if I would imagine Newcastle's on the Evening Chronicle website, for instance, the most popular stories, the top 10 would probably be Newcastle United. Whether there's a major crash somewhere or whatever, that's the world we live in now. Yeah. I mean, clickbait is the new god of journalism, sadly.
Yeah. So to bring us up to speed on you, Ian, so what are you up to now, and where can we find you kind of writing and talking about football?
Right. Well, let me see. In 2017, I got moved to cover England, and this was when the Star Express and the Mirror all came into the same company, and so I enjoyed it. I got on. Of course, Gareth Southgate knew me from Middlesbrough days. I always got on well with him. I think he's a terrific human being. And even though England's not my team, and one or two lads used to look at me when God Save the Queen came, because if you got from an Irish ancestry, you don't sing that. But anyway, I loved it. And I remember a game. It was when England won, was it the quarterfinal against Bulgaria? Not Bulgaria. Was it Bulgaria? When Jordan Pickford was man of the match. And of course,
I can't remember.
I must tell you this. There was a sort of a media centre, and when you might remember seeing it on Sky Sports, the England players had come and played darts and snooker with her. Yeah. Anyway, so Jordan Henderson, Jordan Pickford, have we signed anyone yet? Who are we going to sign? and this was the Liverpool captain and Jordan Pickford, the England goalkeeper, and I can always remember that you can take the lads out of Sunderland, but you can't take Sunderland out of the lads. But anyway, so after that, I continued covering England until COVID. And after COVID, I took redundancy from the Mirror and set up on my own. So I work from home. And basically, I'm still doing a lot of work for the Mirror, a bit for the Sun, and I've been writing for 442 magazine as well. What has changed, and I find it abhorrent, almost as abhorrent as 94-year-old Doug Weatherall does, who still likes to rant. He's still just as passionate with his rants now as he was 30, 40 years ago. And the fact that the championship's ignored. Some papers, they will use the press association and they won't send people to championship games. Now, I can't understand how a game between Ipswich and Brentford is bigger than a game between Sunderland and Middlesbrough or Leeds, Burnley, with the fan base of Leeds, Sunderland in particular. But again, that's the world we live in. So there have been times when I haven't had a match. I've covered quite a bit of Newcastle matches at the moment, and on Saturday, I thought I'd be at Sunderland Millwall. I'm at Middlesbrough, Oxford. Right. But as I say, I do enjoy going to. I do enjoy going to all three grounds, and I'll go to non-league games if I can, or go watch rugby. I like my rugby as well.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly in terms of England, is that almost the pinnacle for a football journalist to cover a World Cup like that?
I suppose it was. I mean, I'd never really watched England, but yes, I suppose so. I mean, I can remember sitting there in Moscow for the World Cup, the World Cup semi-final against Croatia. Now, and I remember thinking to myself, I'm lucky. I felt the same when I was on the centre court when Andy Murray won his two titles, and I would say, the pinnacle journalism's the wrong word. No, you just feel very privileged, lucky, and happy to be there, really.
Yeah. Well, again, talking about if there's a choice between Sunderland winning something and England winning something, there's no competition.
I don't think there is, but any club really is.
Exactly.
Most Leicester fans would say that.
But just focusing on Sunderland in the modern day, third year we've been in the Championship, which is a tough league to get out. I think it's a fantastic league. The Championship.
There's no VAR, which makes it better than.
It's a reason not to go up. Kira Louis-Dreyfus, he was the owner who got us out of League One, and probably looking at playoff campaign again in the Premier League this season for a second time in 3 years. And it's probably the one time in my lifetime it's felt like the club have a direction and have a plan to move forward. I mean, how do you view the way Sunderland are doing things at the moment?
I always think the two qualities a club has to have identity and connectivity.
Mm-hmm.
Identity in the way a team plays and the signings, etc., and connectivity with fans. Now, there've been many, many times Sunderland haven't had either of them.
Mm-hmm.
They've got both of them now. So that's important. The other thing to realise is Sunderland are sitting on a gold mine of talent. They're the youngest squad in all 4 divisions. They have got 2 players who are being talked about in the 20 million category. Another 2 or 3 who are certainly going to be maybe 10 million, but certainly more than 5 million for argument's sake. So that's what's good. I am impressed by Regis Laprise, but what I will say, there's a little bit of concern, and I know you've spoken about it on your podcast, Chris, that Sunderland don't win games by many goals. If they do win them, and Sunderland are good, but I remember after they'd beaten Portsmouth, they won the first 3 games of it, or first 4. Anyway, I remember thinking they're going to go up. There's something happening here. I thought it 2 years ago, watching the 5-0 game against Southampton, but that season went awry. So there's an awful lot to be good with. I did expect Sunderland to kick on. It's probably only the whole game when I thought they've got no chance of automatic promotion. I held hope there, like many of your listeners will have as well. I'd love to see Mayanda kick on. You know, he misses chances, but, you know, 7 goals for a 19-year-old, impressive stuff. Chris Reid is up there with the best talents, probably. Well, he's certainly the best 17-year-old in Sunderland colours since Michael Bridges, another good friend of mine who, my goodness, his mum and dad loved me when I compared him to Marco van Basten in the Evening Chronicle after he scored against Huddersfield in the promotion season. But but I think Reid is special talent. Bellingham, like his brother, he just makes it all look so easy. He's got so much time in the ball. I love the fullbacks. If they're both missing, that's going to be a huge blow. I mean, you could go through that side and you can make a lot of positives about all of them.
Yeah. And actually, Michael Bridges scored past someone else you've mentioned, Tony Norman, that day at Roker Park, and he scored those goals.
That's right. Now he's someone. I know a few years ago he wasn't in good health, was he? But I hope he's better. I haven't seen him for a long time.
Yeah. I hope he's doing well. Just in terms of the way we're doing things, Christian Speakman, I want to speak about him and his head of recruitment, Stuart Harvey. They've basically overlooked the change on the pitch, you know, for the owner over the last few years. I mean, where Sunderland are now compared to when they came to the club is kind of night and day. But it's funny because, you know, I've said this a few times that, you know, looking at the progress of Sunderland, and people are starting to put a spotlight on how we're doing things. And if you look at the likes of, you know, Everton and their recruitment record over the last few years, and you could reel off quite a few clubs like that. I mean, even Manchester United, you know, at the top end. You know, should we be worried at all that other clubs might look at how they're doing and think, actually, you know, they could do a job with us in the Premier League?
Quite possibly. I mean, if we know that Sunderland are still, we're talking about the 90s, they're still not the biggest payers. If a Manchester United or even Everton came and were ready to treble their wages when they're, you know, like the rest of us have got families to look after. So, yeah, it could be a worry. While I know Alchemists, their record, it is quite extraordinary. I mean, when you think of the players who came to Sunderland years ago, do you know something, Chris? When you were interviewing them, you'd get the impression whether they wanted to be here or they didn't want to be here. Now, I know you mentioned Jack Rodwell the other day in a podcast. Now, straight away, it was pretty obvious he didn't want to be here. Now, players who did, I can remember Seb Larson, for instance. Now, I always think it makes sense for Northeast clubs to sign Scandinavians. You know, certainly made sense with Newcastle and Isaac, but you know, I think, you know, Netherlands and Scandinavia are logical recruitment grounds for clubs based up here.
Yeah. And, you know, we've talked about how Sunderland have done things, and look, in terms of recent events, look, Newcastle have obviously done things differently, and look, there's arguments on both sides, and I'd like to think that I have the opinion that I do because of what it is, rather than because it's Newcastle United. But I do feel like there's a knock-on effect where it affects the rivalry because of how I see Newcastle, and that they've almost lost a piece of who they are in a certain sense, and the path they've taken. But and I also feel that it's almost a shame that in some ways, and again, I don't want to sound like it's just a Sunderland fan here, which I might do, but I feel like things that they achieve might just have an asterisk against it, moving forward in the years. I mean, is that a harsh way to look at it?
It's listen, I'm uncomfortable about the ownership. I'm happy to see a Northeast club challenging for honours. I wish they weren't owned by one of the most oppressive regimes in the world. And I'd like to think a lot of Newcastle fans would have felt very uncomfortable when the chairman joined in the celebrations on the pitch, because he is very closely embroiled in a regime which, well, let's face it, public executions, they still execute under 18s, and they will put people in prison for retweeting. So, wouldn't it be lovely if you had a Bob Murray and a John Hall, although not having John Hall since he advocated a vote for reform, but wouldn't it be lovely if we had people, boyhood fans who became billionaires and they could fund the club? So, Steve Gibson, who's done a terrific job at Middlesbrough. Middlesbrough fans are rightly proud of their owner. Are Newcastle fans proud of their owner, or are they proud of their owner's spending power? There's a difference.
Yeah. Those days are definitely gone. And look, we are talking about Newcastle because of that rivalry, but it is an indictment of where football is at the minute as well. So, but just back to Sunderland, in terms of the run-in, it's a very, very strange run-in because that Sunderland are almost kind of already camped in the playoffs. And there's
limbo.
There's these games left.
So
how do you think the manager might try and kind of play out these last remaining games?
I don't know. I remember in the press box before the Preston game, and I was sitting next to Jeff Brown and Simon O'Rourke. I said, I fancy a 4-0 here. I was, like a lot of fans, I was excited to see Isidore and Mayenda in tandem, but it was a dreadful performance, actually. Yeah. There's no other word for it. I'm a little bit worried Sunderland have lost their mojo. I don't think it's a case of easing off. I think we are all waiting for the day when Lafille plays in the number 10 role, are we? And I think that's what's keeping everyone going. Will Sunderland play like they did earlier this season once the Frenchman is fully fit again? But you can't make predictions at the moment, because no one would have predicted a home defeat against Hull City, or quite a fortuitous draw against Preston. And the harsh fact is that those type of games, Leeds, Sheffield United, and Burnley have found a way of winning them. Sunderland haven't. So, I can't really answer how they'll go this season, but I am looking forward to the day when Lebrie can play his compatriot in his favourite role.
Yeah. I think everyone's excited about that. And you mentioned all of those players, and there's big links with Chris Rigg this week with going to Tottenham, Joe Bellingham off to Manchester United, apparently, if you believe the rumours, if you believe the papers, of course, Ian. But do you think it's a big season in terms of Sunderland needing to go up?
Yes and no. Are they ready? I don't know. Do they need to go up to keep their best players? Yes. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if at least one of Bellingham and Rigg leave this summer, irrespective of what division Sunderland are in come August. If they, heaven forbid, Sunderland miss out on promotion, then there will be an awful a lot of top flight clubs and clubs abroad will come sniffing.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting. And it's obviously Millwall up next, which of course brings Alex Neil back. And I just wanted to get your opinion on this because it's a strange one. All the good work he did as manager, taking us up he took us over when he took over. We weren't in a great position, and he got us into those playoffs, then won it. But that was wiped out completely by the way he left for Stoke City. How did you see that?
It was strange. I at the time I wasn't. It wasn't like a few years ago when I was covering every nook and cranny at Sunderland. So I remember coming to the press conference and it had been delayed, and it was Nick Barnes, I think, told me. And it was the first I'd heard of it. I was out of the loop very much at that stage. Then you hear that he was commuting to and from Wearside, which is always a bad sign. And of course, he wasn't happy with the emphasis on youth. He had his own targets. And of course, as Tony Mowbray subsequently found out, you are a head coach, you're not a manager. Yeah. The fact it was done on a Friday left a bit of a bad taste. The fact he moved to Stoke City, and I'm only being half serious here, left an even worse taste because I think, am I right in thinking, since they got relegated, they haven't been in the top 12 or top 14 in the championship. So, absolutely. So, I mean, listen, Sunderland fans will always be eternally grateful with what he did. No, he won't go down as most Mackham's favourite manager, will he?
No. Well, I mean, the playoffs could be interesting. We'll obviously have one of the top three missing out on automatics, and then Coventry, who Sunderland love to play. And then you've got Tony Mowbray at West Brom, and then Middlesbrough only 3 points off the top six. So it could get interesting. How's your confidence in Sunderland going up eventually?
Well, it's very, very similar to the question you asked earlier. I want to see what they're like with Lefay at number 10. He's an outstanding talent. That's the position that he favours. That's the position that Reid brought him in for. So I'm going to bottle that question at the moment.
I mean, but it's an interesting one because I suppose it depends on who we can get fit for those 3 games.
That's right. I mean, I'd love to. I hope Hume's injury isn't too serious, and hopefully Serkin is. I always think good sides have good fullbacks, and Sunderland have good fullbacks. Let's give a shout out to Niall Huggins, the unluckiest player the clubs have for many, many years. Wouldn't it have been lovely if they could just drafted him in, which they can't. Hjelde, I think fans they're looking at a player who isn't as bad as some feared, but he's a 6 out of 10 performer. I would have thought, well, Serkin is capable of much more than that. So I'd like to see the two fullbacks back in tandem ahead of the playoffs. Yeah,
it's a shame, isn't it? Because when you look at our fullbacks on paper, we've got a great set of fullbacks, some of the best in the division. We just can't get them fit for a full season.
That's right. And as I say, when you look at good performances, whichever team you support, if they play well, invariably those two positions play well.
Yeah. So just in case it does happen, will you likely be covering it if we potentially get to Wembley?
I hope so. I mean, listen, you will hope I wasn't. I wouldn't be there. I wasn't there for the Newcastle final. They should do a documentary about me as the worst Wembley record in history. Played 16, won none, drawn 1, lost 15. I didn't go to the previous playoff game. I've seen Sunderland lose there in 92, 99, 2014. I've seen Newcastle lose there in Charity Shield 96, 98, 99, and a semi-final 2001. I've seen Middlesbrough lose twice in 97 and a playoff, which I've forgotten what year that was. I covered, and let's just for this particular moment call Hull City Northeast, I covered their FA Cup final against Arsenal. They lost. I stayed on the following day to see Gateshead lose the National League playoff against Cambridge. The only in 30-odd years of covering football in the North East, then the only success I've seen personally, firsthand, was Middlesbrough's win against Bolton in the Carling Cup, and that was held in Cardiff.
So that's the secret then. If we stop you from
You
going,
may call me Jonah. Yeah. Well, listen, it's worked for Newcastle, hasn't it? I wasn't there, and it's worked for them.
Well, that's it. Now we know the secret if we do get there.
Yep, absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, I suppose that's a perfect place to leave it there. Thanks again, Ian. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we, of course, really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thoroughly enjoyed it, Chris. Thanks a lot.
Good stuff. And hopefully we might catch up to review Sunderland's promotion.
Wouldn't that be lovely?
Yes,
that be lovely?
It would. But thanks again, Ian. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thanks again for everyone for listening. We really do appreciate it. We've got loads more coming up for you as we focus on the Millwall game at the weekend. There'll be lots of build-up on the site as usual, and I'm sure another How Are the podcast will be dropping very soon. And keep a look out on Local Report site for all of the latest on that. But from us, bye for now.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.